As Pakistan continues to suffer the devastating consequences of unprecedented floods that have left a third of the country underwater and millions of people displaced, the UN warns that the situation is beyond bleak. So why isn't the international community doing more to help? I asked Pakistan's Minister of Foreign Affairs. Hello and welcome to the program. I'm Rida Fakhri at UN headquarters in New York. Pakistan, the world's fifth most populous nation, is still grappling with a massive humanitarian tragedy triggered by unprecedented monsoon rains and floods that have killed over 1,500 people, over a third of them children. As the death toll continues to rise in flood-affected areas, the crisis has been compounded by widespread outbreaks of waterborne diseases such as malaria and typhoid. The government has warned that the situation could soon get out of control. Now, the floods have destroyed over 2 million homes and left at least 7.6 million people displaced, according to the UN refugee agency, UNHCR. The rains, which brought 30 years' worth of average precipitation to some areas of the country, are, at least partially, the result of climate change, a reality that increasingly threatens some of the world's most vulnerable populations. Just last month, United Nations Secretary General Antonio Guterres accused the international community of not doing enough.
The government of Pakistan has asked for the international community's help. Let us work together to respond quickly and collaboratively to this colossal crisis. Let us all step up in solidarity and support to the people of Pakistan in their hour of need. Let's stop sleepwalking towards the destruction of our planet by climate change. Today, it is Pakistan. Tomorrow, it could be your country.
So how is the international community responding to the humanitarian catastrophe unfolding in Pakistan? And what level of foreign assistance can the government hope to get here at the United Nations as it attempts to strike the right balance in its geopolitical relations? Joining me now on the margins of the 77th UN General Assembly is Bilawal Bhutto Zardari, Minister of Foreign Affairs of Pakistan. Foreign Minister Bhutto Zardari, thanks so much for being with me.
Thank you for having me.
Now, you are attending your first General Assembly as Minister of Foreign Affairs just weeks after the country was flooded by devastating rains. A third of Pakistan submerged. In addition to the tragic loss of life, economic losses of up to $30 billion and counting. What international assistance did you seek and what did you get while you were here at the United Nations? I imagine this is the first item on the agenda.
This is absolutely our only agenda item. I mean, as you mentioned, Pakistan is going through a climate catastrophe of biblical apocalyptic proportions. We've all heard the story of Noah's floods, that it rained for 40 days and 40 nights. Well, our monster monsoons started in mid-June and ended at the end of August. And when the rains finally stopped, a 100-kilometer lake formed in the middle of my country that could be seen from space. We, as you mentioned, a third of the country's landmass is underwater, and 1 in 7 of my population, 33 million people, bigger than the population of New York State, Sri Lanka, many other countries, dire need of assistance.
And yet, is the world coming to Pakistan's assistance? And by that I mean, are wealthy Western donors doing enough to help?
Look, absolutely, the world is stepping up and assisting Pakistan. And we're incredibly grateful for all the countries that have come to our assistance, particularly to the UN Secretary General, who visited Pakistan immediately during the flooding and has come to the United Nations and made this a cornerstone of this session. He mentioned Pakistan and the floods, I think, 3 times in his speech. We've had a UN flash appeal, and going forward, once the damage needs assessment is done, we will be holding a conference. But my message really to the world is that we don't want to seek aid. We want justice for our people, because I don't know if you're aware, but Pakistan's carbon footprint, or our carbon output, is about 0.8%. That's less than 1%. And we're amongst the 10 most climate-stressed countries on the planet. That's incredibly unfair. that these 33 million people of Pakistan are literally paying with their lives and their livelihoods for the industrialization and greenhouse gases of rich countries.
But, but before we talk about the effect of climate change, let me just pick on what you said about the Secretary General and the fact that you believe that the Western world has come to your aid. The SG himself has said that the world was sleepwalking through this tragedy, through these floods. He did visit Pakistan, yes, but then if we haven't seen the kind of aid that matches the scale of this tragedy, his visit could not have been that successful, was it?
It's absolutely successful in not only garnering the attention, and the attention is what we need before we can get the aid. And as far as officially gathering the aid is concerned, while it has come in bits and pieces as of now, once our waters finally recede, because it's going to take many months for the waters to pass, and the damage needs assessment is done, then we will have a proper figure, a comprehensive dossier, which the United Nations Secretary General himself and other world leaders, including President Macron of France, have offered to assist us and support us, not only for the relief and rescue, but going forward for reconstruction and rehabilitation. The problem is the scale. The scale of this tragedy is so immense that despite the fact that we have received aid, and quite a bit of aid, it's all a drop in the ocean when it comes to the sheer scale of the tragedy.
And you blame much of it on climate change, do you?
It's not me. I mean, the scientists are saying that this storm was 50% worse as a result of climate change.
But monsoon rains, though, in Asia are not a new phenomenon.
No, absolutely.
Some believe that the government should have been better prepared. In fact, a lot of scientists also believe that blaming it all on the doorsteps of climate change is misleading, because they say the government has also mismanaged the crisis.
I'd really love for you to name the scientist that says that. Frankly, we're used to floods. We're used to monsoons. This was nothing normal. We've had historic floods, the biggest in our history, in 2011, in 2010. But what do you do when a 100-kilometer lake forms in the middle of your country? What do you do when flooding comes from the skies? So there's no way that the government could feel this body of water is still descending towards my ocean. I challenge any country, the most powerful countries on earth. I challenge America, that if a 100-kilometer lake formed here in New York and suddenly the entire population of New York was homeless, hungry, in need of medicine, would the strongest, most powerful, richest country on earth afford to feed them immediately, house them immediately? So the problem is that those that are suffering as a result of these cataclysmic climate events, sure, are not prepared for such a scale of the disaster, but they're also not the ones who contributed to it, who caused it.
It is on a different level, and no one is arguing with this point. 90% of crops in Sindh province, which is considered the breadbasket of Pakistan, have been damaged. And next year's crops, you might expect, would also be compromised. Do you foresee a doomsday scenario where some local officials are saying those who won't die from the floods may die as a result of starvation?
This is an absolutely compounding catastrophe, because we're still in the rescue and relief phase, because as I mentioned, this water is descending to the oceans, and then going forward, because of the stagnant water and the sheer scale of it, there's the potential of an epidemic of waterborne diseases. So we've got a climate catastrophe, a health catastrophe, as you mentioned, the crops of 4 million acres of standing crop destroyed, and the coming crop is wheat, and if we miss that, which is what it's looking like, that means a serious food security issue. And to top it all off, we just entered into the IMF agreement after very difficult negotiations, and we were looking forward to a sigh of economic relief. But unfortunately, all the estimates, all the figures, all the numbers that deal is based on is also washed away from the floods. So on top of all of this, we're potentially staring at incredibly difficult economic times.
And you mentioned that what Pakistan needs isn't aid. It's something more fundamental. But can Pakistan withstand the threats of a looming famine and the impacts of climate change all at once and all on its own?
That's absolutely, I think what you mentioned there is absolutely right, all on its own. That's something we can't do. It's a global This sort of catastrophe is a result of global actions, and its solution has to be global as well.
Are you willing to accept the help from anyone, any country? Because if Pakistan is in such dire need of financial and humanitarian assistance to deal with these floods, why isn't it willing to accept all the help it can get, including from countries like India?
We haven't rejected help from anyone. We haven't been offered any help from India. And at the moment, we are honestly, as in we're not focused on whether we can make peace with one country or the geopolitical obsessions of everyone else. We're literally at the moment focused on saving lives.
Would you accept the help of India?
Every single, I mean, I wouldn't turn it away, but it's not something that I've actively sought out.
Let me turn to geopolitics. The relationship between Pakistan and the United States recently has been rocky, to say the least. The Biden administration accused Pakistan of not doing more to help the US in Afghanistan. It views the growing ties with Beijing with suspicion, maybe even angst. The former Prime Minister Imran Khan accused the US of orchestrating and engineering a coup against him. How do you qualify the US-Pakistan relationship today?
Okay, that was all over the place. Let's start with the Afghanistan question. I think that there's plenty of blame to go around in Afghanistan. The fact of the matter is we all now have to deal with the new reality over there. And it'll be important for everyone to work together for what's in the interest of the Afghan people. I don't think it's in anyone's interest, not the Afghan people or the people in the region, to have an unsafe Afghanistan, an unstable Afghanistan, and particularly given the grave economic and humanitarian situation that we're witnessing there, it is important for us to step up and try and avert a total humanitarian or economic collapse. As far as America's interference in, or alleged interference and role in Mr. Khan's ouster, I mean, that's just a pretty lame excuse. As everyone who's sort of observing the relationship at the time, America was pretty disengaged from Pakistan during this period. And Mr. Khan's ouster was the first democratic constitutional ouster of any prime minister in the country's history. Before this, prime ministers have been hanged, they've been exiled, there's been actual coups, so we don't throw the term coup around so loosely. We've had military coups, we've had judicial coups. This time, we had a parliamentary procedure of a vote of no confidence that resulted in Mr. Khan losing his majority.
Many expect him to come back. Do you?
If he comes back through a free and fair election, we'd welcome it. We opposed him coming through a compromised, rigged election. We believe in democracy, and he has absolute right to take part in the democratic process.
Is the US still holding off on engaging fully with Pakistan, or is Pakistan hedging its relationship with the US now that China has become such a major economic and military superpower?
So I don't think our relationship with either country are mutually exclusive. We have long-standing ties with our neighbor China. There's a deeply rooted relationship which is not going anywhere regardless of overall situation with any country. And we have standalone ties with the United States. And I believe that we're both engaging with each other in a positive manner. And while in the past, perhaps our relationship or the cooperation between our two countries were heavily colored by the events in Afghanistan, now is the opportunity for us to build a more broad-based partnership.
And you are building a bigger partnership with the United States. In fact, the Biden administration announced that it would upgrade in a $450 million deal Pakistan's F-16 squadrons. What led to this reversal? What was the quid pro quo?
It was all right. Pakistan had purchased this equipment. I believe it was incredibly unfair that despite having bought this this material from the United States and it requiring maintenance and upkeep from time to time, that was being deprived from us. So I definitely welcome this decision of the United States, and I think that America is the sort of country that should live up to such international obligations.
To what extent and how long can Pakistan continue to play this balancing act between the United States on the one hand, strategically, and China on the other?
I don't see the need for us to balance. We have a standalone relationship with our neighbor China and the United States. I do believe that an increase in tension between these two countries will not serve anybody's purpose. This is the decade that we should be joining together to face existential threats such as climate change. And in the past, Pakistan has played the role of a bridge between China and the United States, particularly at the time they were establishing their diplomatic relations. And that's the role we see for ourselves in the current situation going forward.
And looking at the closer relationship in recent years between Delhi and Washington by the sheer force of physics, does that mean necessarily that Islamabad and Washington become more distant allies?
I think that the relationship between the United States and India has its own dynamics, and Pakistan has its own engagement and partnership with the United States. And I think the world is big enough for the both of us to have diplomatic relations with the USA.
But on a practical level, is that really the case? So the former Prime Minister Imran Khan last year expressed his regret for the collaboration that Pakistan engaged with the United States in its so-called war on terror. Do you share his perspective?
No. Mr. Khan has always been an appeaser of terror. He's always made excuses for fundamentalists, for extremists, for terrorists. That has been his history. We fundamentally believe that there is no space for violent extremism. And this is not a fight for the United States. This is a fight for for Muslims who believe in the Prophet's peaceful message of Islam. We weren't fighting extremism because of the United States. We didn't send our troops or our planes or anyone into Afghanistan. It was the extremists and the terrorists who came into my country and killed my citizens, who assassinated my mother, who assassinated 80,000 Pakistanis. That's why we will continue to challenge them, no matter what the United States position is.
But how conflicted, though, is Pakistan in its counterterrorism collaboration with the United States? Because what he was suggesting were the drone attacks on the border that left lots of civilians dead. That's what he was talking about. And he said he would absolutely not allow the CIA to use bases on its soil for counterterrorism missions after the withdrawal of US forces from Afghanistan. Has that policy changed?
That is absolutely our policy. There was never a change in that policy. Nor did the United States ever request the Prime Minister for the use of bases. An interviewer asked him, I believe it was on, I forget the name of the channel, but an interviewer asked him, would you allow the use of bases for the US and for the CIA, to which he said absolutely not. It was never a request or a conversation from the United States.
But we know that is often a fait accompli, though, isn't it? Is Pakistan today allowing the United States to use its skies or its ground to operate?
Finish your first question?
But yes or no? Is it allowing?
No, we're not engaged in... Anyway, you're really jumping all over the place. As far as...
I'm being very specific and very direct, Foreign Minister. I'm asking you if Pakistan today allows the United States to use its ground or its air
We
base.
don't allow the United States to use our ground or anything else. As far as drone strikes are concerned, we oppose them before, we oppose them now, and we oppose them in the future. That is my answer to your questions.
Let me ask you about the relationship with Afghanistan. There are tensions, no doubt, between Islamabad and Kabul. There was a bloody incident not too long ago, just last week, on the border. Today, what is your position on the de facto government of Afghanistan? Is it time to recognize officially the Taliban government?
As far as the recognition for the Taliban government is concerned, we'd like to, I would like to see the day where we're in a position to recognize, along with the international community, a government in Afghanistan. Unfortunately, we're not there yet. I believe if the interim regime was to live up to its commitments to the international community, and to its own people, then we would find ourselves in a place where we'd be able to move towards recognition. But we're not there yet.
The relationship with China is an important one for Pakistan. I know after you became foreign minister last April, the following month you were in Beijing meeting with your Chinese counterpart, and in fact you said that any attack on China is an attack on Pakistan. Is this policy or a slogan?
I was referring to a specific terrorist attack actually that had happened recently, and that was the context of my remarks. There was a terrorist attack in Karachi on a Chinese language school where a 21-year-old Chinese language teacher was killed along with some other people. And this was an incredibly obnoxious terrorist attack that left all of Pakistan shaken. I was expressing my true feelings. This attack is an attack on China, which we see as also an attack on Pakistan.
But is this still the case today, following President Biden's statements that the United States stands ready to defend Taiwan if it were to be militarily attacked by China? I mean, to be clear, in the event of a military confrontation between China and the United States over Taiwan, would Islamabad turn its back on Washington?
We in Pakistan believe in the one China policy, no ifs, no buts. And I think it's the increase in tensions and rivalries in our region serves no one's purpose. Frankly, at a time when we are facing one existential threat after another.
But would you have to choose a side? Would you choose a side?
Pakistan strongly and firmly and unequivocally believes in the one China policy. I believe that the United States, the sort of comments you're referring to is more rhetoric, and such a scenario would be catastrophic for the entire region, indeed the entire world.
How much of a thin line is Pakistan walking between Russia and Ukraine? Because Pakistan buys tanks from Ukraine, has agreed to import 2 million tons of wheat from Russia last March. As a key non-NATO ally of the United States, how conflicted is Pakistan about the conflict in Ukraine?
I think this goes back to the question that you just asked me, where I was talking about the existential crises that we now face. Just as I believe this is not a time for tensions in our part of the world, I also believe this is not a time for conflict and war. On this, I agree with the comments of Prime Minister Modi of India, that we're not in a time for war, and I call on the government of Russia and the government of Ukraine to pursue peace through dialogue and diplomacy.
Finally then, you mentioned India, and I know in 2014 you said that you will take back, quote, every inch of Kashmir because it belongs to Pakistan. Today as foreign minister, at the time you were chairman of the Pakistan People's Party, but today as foreign minister, a nuclear power state, Pakistan, how do you resolve this issue? Are you willing to sit down with India and perhaps even accept an independent Kashmir?
So as far as that statement was concerned, I suppose that's 2014. Actually, a lot's changed since then. In 2019, August 2019, India took unilateral, illegal action, tried to alter the internationally disputed status of Jammu and Kashmir, and they continue with such unilateral actions in an effort now to convert what is the last remaining part of India, where there's a sort of region that is under Indian control, that's a Muslim majority. They're attempting to turn the Muslims of Kashmir into a minority in their own home. That has made engagement and talking with the government of India incredibly difficult from a Pakistani perspective. I think what would allow us to go forward, because we do want to live in peace with our neighbors, but the onus is on India to create the atmosphere for that by taking back their unilateral actions of August 2019, so we could have a discussion in line with the UN resolution and the UN position on Kashmir.
Can you avoid engaging in a political settlement with India?
Can I avoid engaging with a political settlement with India? I think that the actions that they've taken, the way that India has moved away from what once was a secular country home to all faiths all religions, including their large Muslim minority, to one that's increasingly a Hindu supremacist state with very little space for their own minorities, for their own Muslims, for their own Christians, let alone the Muslims of Kashmir and Pakistan. But ultimately the solution is dialogue and diplomacy. We all understand that, and I believe particularly the younger generation wants to see the two countries living in peace together.
Foreign Minister Zardari, thank you so much for your time. While his government tries to address the aftermath and the fallout of the epic floods that submerged a third of the country, the Foreign Minister of Pakistan is here at the UN this week to draw attention to the plight of his nation at a time of acute international tensions and economic hardships. But with so many competing items on the global agenda and wealthy Western nations consumed by the war in Ukraine, the plight of millions of Pakistanis is on the back burner. And for now, as the Secretary General of the UN himself has warned, the world will continue sleepwalking to the next humanitarian catastrophe. I'm Rida Fakhri at the UN in New York. Thanks for watching. See you next time.